Well, it's a couple of minutes after 11, so I think we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation this morning. And I just want to say good morning and thanks all for joining us today for the NECAFS July webinar. And this webinar, we're excited today, will feature a presentation and discussion about the on-farm readiness review. And this topic has been identified as something that's of great interest to those in our region. Since FISMA inspection is expected to be very different from an audit, which many of our growers are used to having audits, and many growers have never even been through an audit, the on-farm readiness review was developed to help growers gauge their readiness for an inspection on their farm. And the mission of NECAFS is to support the outreach and education of growers who are affected by FSMA, especially small and medium-sized producers. And we do that through collaboration and integration of national efforts like the On-Farm Readiness Review. So we are really thrilled today to have Wes Klein join us from Rutgers University to walk us through this presentation and discussion of the On-Farm Readiness Review. And there will be plenty of time for questions and conversations at the end. So if you do have a question that comes up, you can put it in the chat box or hold it and we'll unmute everybody at the very end to ask and have some discussion. So with that, I want to thank you and I will turn the presentation over to Wes.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Just to give you a little background, Meredith and I coordinate the on-farm readiness view and food safety training for Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And some people think that these are full-time jobs, but in reality, it's about 50% of each of our time. So we end up with essentially one FTE doing on-farm food safety. I just want to give you a background on what it is and also how the readiness review was developed to give you a better appreciation of what we've gone through. Just as a little refresher, the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law in January of 2011, and the final rules that really apply to growers were published. Final rules were published in August and November of 2015. This has been a big sweeping change for FDA and how they operate, and they really a change in philosophy. They're looking at prevention of contaminants and contamination. So they're going through a big learning curve of how to work with growers, since most FDA people have not been on farms, have very little experience working with agriculture, and they mainly have inspected nutraceutical plants and packing operations and not field situations. So you really need to keep that in mind as we go through this and why we've developed what we have. The main rules for FSMA are the Produce Safety Rule, which is what the readiness review was developed for, and it's really only for the Produce Safety Rule. But the other rules involved are the preventative controls for human food, and that's really manufacturing and separate packing operations, preventative controls for animal food, accreditation of third-party auditors, and this is mainly for offshore. FDA is in the process of accrediting organizations right now to be able to do inspections offshore because they don't have enough people to do it. Foreign supplier verification program. Again, this is where FDA is putting the onus on importers to verify that their offshore operations are meeting the same standards as the domestic suppliers. Intentional adulteration of rule, and the sanitary transportation rule. So these are the main parts for FSMA. What's covered? Raw agricultural commodities, and there are several crops that are not covered. This is only a partial list. This is the list that really apply to the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. So anything that's on this list is not covered by the rule. Also, food grains are not, produce consumed on the farm, and any processed product, as long as you can show that it's being processed and has a kill step. Also, the average annual value of produce sold during the previous 3 years is less than $25,000. this number increases based on inflation. And for instance, the value in 2016 is $26,956. FDA has a publication, if you go on their website, and it will list what the different inflation factors is for the different rules. And it's called FISMA, Inflation Adjusted Cutoffs. So that's important for, especially for extension, to be aware for growers. There's also the qualified exemption. If you have the average annual monetary value of food sold, not just produce, but all food sold in the previous 3 years is less than 500,000. Again, that number adjusts depending on inflation. Also, it must be direct sales to consumers, and that can be through a restaurant, a retail food establishment, as long as it's in the same state or Indian reservation, or within 275 miles of where it's grown. And 51% of those sales must be retail. It includes all food, and that all food is critical because that includes animal food, that includes milk, that essentially includes most things that you're producing on the farm or is being produced on the farm. The compliance states, very small operations, which is 25,000, not more than 250,000, is January 2016, 4 years after 2016, excuse me. Small farms, 250 to 500, it's 3 years after 2016, and smaller farms is 2 years, which larger farms is 2 years, which means it's into effect now. There have been changes to, for instance, the water standards. We know that FDA is revisiting that. So those dates, whether it's going to go into effect in 2 years or not, we don't know for sure, nor do we know exactly how they're going to change it. These are the main parts of the produce rule: agricultural water, which I just mentioned, biological soil amendments, sprouts. I do want to say that the OnFarm Readiness Review does not cover sprouts. There's domestic and wild animals, worker training, health and hygiene, equipment and tools. So the review will cover most of these things except for sprouts. How this came about was when FDA was writing the final rules, NASDA, which is the National Association of Departments of Agriculture, was in discussion with FDA explaining that growers really do not understand what FDA is going to do as far as inspection, how they're going to do it, what's included. So they were asking FDA if there was possible funding to support a program to help growers get better ready for inspection. NASDA, along with 4 state departments of agriculture, Oregon, North Carolina, Michigan, and Vermont, wrote a proposal to FDA, and it was accepted. So the partners involved in this, again, FDA is the funding agency. NASDA is the organization that's handling the money and providing grants to other individuals. USDA, AMS are providing guidance. And then the 4 departments of agriculture: Michigan, Oregon, Vermont, North Carolina. They all also asked 4 universities to be involved in developing materials: University of Florida Extension, Michigan State Extension, North Carolina Cooperative Extension, and Rutgers Cooperative Extension. So this makes up the group that's been working on this for about the last 2 years. So what is the On-Farm Readiness Review? The philosophy is it's education before regulation. As I said, FDA, this is a change in mindset for them, but they do want to support education. They do want to bring growers along before there's any type of real inspection and enforcement. And they're going to gain value from the learning from the industry and the regulators working together in a spirit of cooperation and partnership. This has been interesting to work with FDA on this, as the organization needs to make a lot of changes in how they've been operating. The objectives of the project are really to offer a voluntary pre-inspection readiness review for covered farms. So this would be before there's any type of enforcement or real inspection taking place. Promote cooperation between farmers, regulators, and educators, which is really something new. There's been very little cooperation among the three working together, and we're trying to develop that philosophy. Educate regulators about on-farm conditions. As I said before, FDA has very little experience working directly with growers. And this is the reason that we got involved, because we want to train regulators and inspectors how you work on a farm, what you need to consider. And we'll go into more of that in a little bit. Also, identify any educational needs. There's a lot of information out there on what you need to do for food safety, for FSMA. What we're looking at is identifying any gaps that may exist. Not saying we're going to develop materials, but to identify them so other people may develop them. Also, to familiarize non-qualified farms with the regulation. The reason for this is that if you say you grow less than $25,000 or gross less than $25,000, at some point you may want to get larger. And we want to make sure growers are aware of what they need to do to comply with the inspection if they do have to have an inspection. So let's talk a little bit about how this came about and what we've been considering. Extension works with the Produce Safety Alliance using their framework to develop the components and the recommendations for the on-farm readiness review. We felt this is very important because it's really a continuum, as it is with most things in food safety. You have a starting point, but it really never ends. Also, we are very sensitive, the extension group, to the lack of guidance. It's difficult to come up with recommendations at times when you really do not know what the final rule is going to look like, or the final guidance. We have a final rule, but it's the interpretation of that rule that is a concern. Also, we want to avoid mission creep. What we were concerned about is we come up with something, and if anyone's had any experience with audits, some auditors will say, well, you don't need to do this, but it'd be nice. Or in the future, it'd be nice if you did this. It's not part of your audit, but it'd be nice. And that's what we were concerned about. So we wanted to get something down, written, that everyone could refer to, whether it's a grower, an inspector, or an extension person. So hopefully across the US, it will be as uniform as possible. Realizing we're dealing with humans and different people will interpret them differently at times. What we did was we put together modules, and there's 11 listed here, and these are used for guidance documents, the best that we can do right now without guidance from FDA on these different areas. You'll notice it's broken into pre-harvest, harvest, and post-harvest. The reason we did this was you may have a grower who just plants the crop, but someone else harvests it. Or you may have someone who is running a packing operation, but doesn't do the other parts. That's why it was developed this way. And it does not follow exactly the way the rule is written, because we wanted to put it together as parts that apply to that part of the operation. So you may have things, for instance, with water, which may be in section 112.35, and something else it's 112.10. And we put those into one document. And I'm going to show you a basic thing of how we did that. This is part of the one module we have, and you'll notice on the left side is the regulation. This is the text right out of the rule, and it says 112.12. In the center column, it says recommendations or possible activities that may lead to compliance. This is the plain English version, as much as we can do right now. The left side is really the lawyer speak. The center part is the extension speak. The third column is where we're putting in whether it's a document that's required or a record, or it may just be an observation on the inspector's part. But we wanted to make it very easy for a grower to look at and try to understand. We'll talk about some of the comments that growers have made that have looked at this in a few minutes. The other thing we wanted to do was to try to highlight those areas which were most important. If you notice on the left side, you'll see the section rule in red. That means that that's what FDA considers as the most important aspects. Not meaning other things that are not in red aren't important, but these are the most important, and things to take very serious when you're working with a grower to meet an inspection. After we developed the material, we tested it last summer in Michigan, and we had FDA people, USDA people, NASDA, and Extension group doing this assessment, and we sought feedback from growers and also from the inspection staff. So what we've spent the last year really evaluating our material and modifying it after each time we did an on-farm assessment. Some of the challenges we found is, as far as the extension group was concerned, it was too bulky. We started out on 8.5 by 17 or 14-inch paper. Can you imagine taking 150 or 200 pages on a farm and trying to talk to a grower? So we made modifications on that. We can't interpret the rule completely because we still don't have the guidance from FDA, which they're working on, and we're waiting for those guidances so we don't get on a list of what is gotcha that they would be looking for later on. When we did this, the extension people led all the assessments or the reviews with growers. We did the talking, we did the asking of questions, we did not allow, and FDA did not want to talk. They wanted to listen how we did it. And they were very surprised that we could ask open-ended questions and getting long answers and soliciting information from growers and being able to come up with the same type of information they were looking for, but without asking direct questions that may respond with yes and no answers. We wanted to solicit as much information we could get. This led us to developing what we call walkaround questions, or walks. These are paired with each chapter in the resource guide, and they cover the highlights in the rule. There are essentially 11 pages that cover the whole rule, and for each walk, there may be 3, 4, or 5 questions. These are not the final ideas or final words. These are areas to open up conversation with the grower, but they do correspond with the PSA modules, and they correspond with the resource manual. We also we give the grower a resource manual before we leave, so they have everything, and I will talk about how we went through the whole process in a minute. So why a walk? A traditional regulatory approach is, do you have a sick leave policy? Yeah. Can I see it? Yeah, here it is. They check it. That's it. They got it. With the walk, it's more conversational. What's your sick leave policy? We don't allow workers to touch produce. Well, how do you know if they're ill or not? Supervisors look for frequent trips to the bathroom, other signs of illness. We're trying to solicit as much information as possible to see if the grower really understands what they need for a inspection if one takes place. This is just an example of the walk-around questions for Part 7, which is pre-harvest sanitation. Do you do a pre-harvest inspection of the growing areas? What do you look for? Again, soliciting that information. And you notice that number there at the end of that question is, 112.112, that's the section out of the rule. So if at the conclusion of your walk around, you can refer to that with the grower and look it up in the resource manual. Another, how do you ensure contaminated produce will not be harvested? Again, there's the section rule, and there's more questions as you go down. If you notice the third one there at the end, it has a section number, 112.123, but also in brackets a D. That D means that there's a record required. So we want to make these things as clear as possible and as easy as possible for the assessor that will be going out and working with growers. So we talked to growers about what they thought of this, and we had a what we call a hot wash on the final day of our reviews with growers and with the participants. And the growers have indicated, one, the resource document is easy to read and easy to follow, long but easy to follow. They feel this is a new approach. It's non-prescriptive. It's much more open-ended. One concern they had is they would like to see it aligned more with a third-party audit. They would like to see things that are essentially the same. In reality, that's not going to quite happen. However, USDA is in the process of rewriting their harmonized audit to try to come as close as possible with the FISMA rule. And also, I know some other private firms are doing the same thing. They also wanted us to improve the efficiency of the tool. They didn't know why a grower needed to answer questions that didn't apply to them. They would like to see questions that if they didn't apply, then they could get ignored. And they especially wanted that so the inspectors understood that this part of the rule did not apply to them. So based on their interest, we developed what we call a decision tree. And these are just some of the questions. For instance, have you completed the PSA grower training or an equivalent? Yes or no? If no, the website is there where growers could go to get more information. Do you have operations covered under the produce rule? If they did not know, then again, there is the website, and in our resource manual, we actually have the decision tree that FDA developed to help growers look through it to see if they apply. Everyone has to do health and safety, hygiene. If yes, then you check that, and I'll show you that form in a minute. If no, if operations are exempt, record-keeping requirements apply, depending on the particular exemption. And I'll show you that module in a second also. But this is the type of questions we ask. There's essentially 11 questions to help guide what parts the grower would need to be inspected for or reviewed. These are the actual list, and what you do as you go through those questions, you check which ones you would need to review. So for instance, if they're not using biological soil amendments of animal origin, that would get ignored. So that helps narrow down at how much time it takes for the grower and really what's important to look at the farm. If you may qualify for the exemption, qualified exemption, then these are the questions. And again, this is a separate sheet in the guide. Do you grow only or sell these crops, which are the ones that are not covered? Do you grow only for personal? You could check if it is yes, yes. Do you grow commercially processed with a kill step? Do you sell less than $25,000? If you answer most of these, then you would qualify for the exemption. If not, then this is the next step, is how much you sell, where you sell it, what percentage, and what your dollar value is, whether it's yes or no. If you answer yes to both of these, your farm is eligible for a qualified exemption. And then the only thing that applies in that case, of course, is the labeling rules, which go into effect later on. Once we developed these materials and we did a couple on-farm assessments, we wanted to develop material that could be used for training. everyone needs to understand that right now we are not training assessors. We're working on developing our materials and approving our materials before we start training assessors on a national basis. So what we've done is essentially the introduction, which part of what I'm going over now, expectation of assessors and on-farm etiquette. We feel this is very important, especially with your working with people who have not been involved in agriculture. What do you do when you get to a farm? How do you greet the individual? What if a gate is open or a gate is closed? Do you accept samples, for instance? Step by step, what you consider. One thing with FDA is they have some people in the program that are with the National Health Service, and they're uniformed individuals. So we've tried to stress that they should not wear a uniform when they're doing the assessments. We also go through the walk-around questions and a walkthrough, what you should look at, how you do it, what you leave behind with the grower. We've made the decision that any notes that are taken should be left with the grower. You should not leave with anything. It's the grower's information. Remember, this is confidential. It's voluntary. You leave them the resource guide and any notes you may have taken. This is about a half day, that part. Then we do action scenarios. These scenarios are actual farmers interacting with a group of trainees in the classroom to get a feel how they work with growers, and then we critique them after each scenario. We then do farm visits, where generally 2, where the first one, the trainers do the on-farm assessment with the grower, and then the second one is the trainees do the on-farm assessment, and then we go through and critique them on how well and what they may have missed. Then we ask the growers, again on a separate day, to tell us what they thought of how the process went. We feel this is a basic outline of how training will be done in the future. We're finishing up, you'll notice on the next slide, these are the testing locations we've done so far. Actually, the last one is this week in Michigan. Once we finish these, then we're going to review all of our materials and make any final changes. Actually, starting next week, we will be reviewing each slide set to make any changes we need to make for the training that will be coming up later on. So who carries out the on-farm readiness reviews? It's hoped that it's a team approach. It would be an extension person, someone from the State Department of Agriculture or Health, depending on who has responsibility for the FDA grant, and before the rule goes into effect, an FDA person. This is not going to be always possible. We know that. An FDA will stop going on them once the rule goes completely into effect. But we hope the extension and someone from one of the state departments will be involved. It's much better to have more than one person do it. That's why we think these are the logical persons to do it. Who pays for this? This is always a question as money is tight, especially with the extension groups getting less funds and asking to do more things. Food and Drug Administration has provided grants to 42 states, and an additional state I know has received funding this year, so it's 43. This is a 5-year project. We're into this second year of this 5-year project. Some states, including New Jersey, are subcontracting with universities to carry out the educational portion of the grant. I know in New Jersey that the Department of Ag felt that we could do a better job of doing that, so we're already working with growers on food safety. And this is a very much a close collaborative effort in this state between the department and us, where we meet on a regular basis, and the department attends all of our trainings. I would encourage extension in any state to contact their Department of Ag or Health, again, depending on who has the grant, to see how you fit into this organization. There is money available for training. There is money available to carry out the on-farm readiness reviews. And I would strongly encourage you to get involved sooner than later if you're interested. And the reason for that is it is a 5-year project. However, the extension portion of this is being front-loaded. So if you get involved now, you may be able to get resources to carry out something you may already be doing. Just want to mention a little bit about the difference between an audit and an inspection, because most growers, if you're a wholesale grower especially, have been probably involved in audits, or at least you know about them. Audits are usually point-based, they're annual, they're crop specific. In some cases, you may have one crop on the farm audited and none others, and the consequences of failure or loss of sales, or potential loss of sales. Inspection is not point-based. It's intermittent. It's not annual. It may be, for instance, every 5 years. It may be based on the commodity you're growing, the high-risk crops such as leafy greens. It does cover the whole farm, and there are regulatory consequences of non-compliance. And those can be additional visits. Those could be at very egregious situations, shutting down of an operation. If you look at an audit, this is the USDA GAP audit, and you notice the question there where it's in red: crop production areas are monitored for presence of signs of wild and domestic animals entering the land. With an audit, a grower may say, I can afford to lose those 5 points. I got enough points to pass this. I really don't want to do this, but you can still pass the audit. However, with a FISMA inspection, it's not the same situation. Again, if you look at the 4th block down there where it says you must, it does not say, well, it'd be nice if you did this. You must do this. So this can lead to corrective action reports. It can lead up to follow-up inspections. In some states, depending on what the authority is, there may be fines involved or worse. So this is much different than an audit. How does the on-farm readiness review fit into this? It's really between the two. We are preparing growers to take an inspection without the on-farm readiness review having any regulatory authority. We're trying to help growers. Why would growers want to do this? It helps match what they're doing to what's required in the rule. It helps them figure out what they may be missing. They get a second set of confidential eyes on the farm. That's very important. This is just for that farm and no one else. It is voluntary. And again, it is confidential. And it'll improve the likelihood of someone passing an inspection. And I can't stress enough that it's confidential and it's voluntary. Because the minute information is written down, passed to someone else, it's no longer confidential, and you're going to lose working with those growers on a regular basis. So again, as a review, it's not point-based. It happens once. In reality, it may be more than once if a grower wants you to come back and give, for instance, technical assistance. And that may open up areas for additional activities for extension. It does cover the whole farm, covers critical areas on the farm that are part of the rule. And remember, we're talking about just what is in the rule, nothing else. Again, voluntary and confidential. The way we see this, it should be a continuum. Again, the grower should take the grower training, the Produce Safety Alliance training or an equivalent. Then the growers that take that training can go through the on-farm readiness review, and then they should be ready inspection. I know some states, such as Vermont, their idea is to have growers take the training and go through the on-farm readiness review before there would be any regulatory inspections. And I think that's a very good model, because we want to bring growers along. We want to help them develop the philosophy of food safety, and that's really what we're trying to do. And we're trying to protect food supplies and the grower's bottom line. So how will states be involved, and individuals in the states? As I said previously, what we've been doing is developing the material, developing the lesson plans to train individuals. A series of trainings are planned across the United States starting in late fall of this year and through the summer of 2018. The idea, again, these will be regional trainings. It will not be state by state. And there should be grant funds through your state grants to provide for this training. And we will go around the state, around the country, do the trainings, and I'll show you where we're proposing right now. So it's important that each state picks the individuals who are going to be involved at the extension level and at the State Department of Ag and Health level to take these trainings. And also, we will be having FDA people at these trainings. So these are the proposed locations right now for the regional trainings. These have not been solidified. The dates may change somewhat, but these are the rough locations of what we're talking about. Also, there's been some discussion about a mentoring program where once someone goes through this training, then they would have an individual or a group of individuals they could contact if they needed additional help. And in some cases, the trainers may be going out with growers, or I'm sorry, with these teams for a couple visits to see how they're doing. So that's just in discussion, and we'll be having a meeting next month to go over this and make final decisions. So what if you want more information? The National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, you can see that phone number there, and also their email address. You can contact them about additional information. And if you want to propose maybe a location for a regional training, you can also contact them. So this gives you a quick overview of where we are, what we've done so far. We will be meeting, as I said, in September to go over the final documents and also getting ready to publish those. And hopefully we'll be starting the trainings in November. And the idea is to do these trainings where we'll actually be able to go out on farm after we do the classroom training, because we want to make sure everyone understands what the steps are and how this is supposed to work. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you, Wes, so much. So I am going to go ahead and unmute everybody. And if you are muted on your personal location, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or put something in the chat box. And I also wanted to, in this time, open it up. I know we have some folks from the Produce Safety Alliance and from the Vermont Produce Safety team on the webinar, to give them a chance to add any final comments or questions for the group to get the discussion going here. So I have a question in the chat box from Angela Shaw, and she asked, do growers have to be in season for a readiness review?
Growers need to be in season, yes, because we want to see the operation, how they work, how they pack, if they're packing, sanitation, how they are sanitizing. We want to see those things. So yes, they need to be in operation.
Great. Any other questions? And go ahead and you can speak up because everybody is unmuted, so you can just talk and everyone will hear you, or if you feel more comfortable putting it in the chat box, that's fine too. And again, I guess Betsy, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add, or I see that Emma and Christina from Vermont are on, if you have anything to add from the pilot process that you guys just went through.
First of all, I think Wes did a great job. So I thought that was a really good overview and summary. As I think is, I guess I'll throw out there some of my biggest concerns, and I think Wes hit on these a little bit. Without inspector training, without guidance, some of this is really tough. As an extension educator, I like going out there and feeling confident in, giving them information, but I think there's a lot of unknowns yet. But the process so far has gone really well, and I think Wes really captured it well in his presentation.
Yeah, and I will reinforce what Betsy said. Inspector training is just starting. FDA will have their first pilot in the Northwest in August, so we are ahead of where they are. And this is a big concern on our part because we're not involved in that inspector training. We would like to be, but at this point we are not. So we're not exactly sure how they're handling that.
Okay, great. And we had a couple more questions come in the chat box. These are in the theme of registration once we can start offering the trainings. And so the question is, how big will the training classes be? Is there a limit to the number of participants? Will there be a registration site? And how will we be notified once the dates and registration process is finalized and trainings are available?
Some of that I can answer. We honestly don't know how many people we're going to have in a training. That's what we're going to decide in September, some of those final things. You'll be notified. NASDA will be putting out information on where they will be, how you register. So those will be forthcoming once we have those dates firmed up. But as far as the number, we honestly have not discussed that yet.
So will NASDA be doing a big press release or a big announcement for that, or is that something we should just be checking back on their website for?
No, they'll definitely be doing a big press release and getting it out to all the state departments of agriculture and health to make sure they know. And through extension, we will get it out to all the different extension services across the U.S.
Okay, great. So another question we have is, does every farmer who grows produce have to have a readiness review? And can an extension person hold a review on one farm for a group of farmers?
That's a good question. And I think that may be the way it would need to work in some areas. However, to me, that's more of a training, and you still would need to do the individual farms. The reason being is that each farm is unique, and there may be things on one farm that don't apply to another farm, or they may do it different, which may have a different impact. But as an initial training, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, great. And then in reference to the documents that you discussed in the webinar, when will they be available, or other resources, and where will those also be on the NASDA website?
NASDA, as soon as we finish the final forms in next month, meaning September, because we're in August, NASDA will print those, and they will make it available at each of the trainings to everyone. We have not discussed whether it's going to be on their website or not, but that's something we can explore.
Okay. And you had mentioned that if you wanted to hold a regional training that wasn't already scheduled, you could call and do that. Is there a limit to the number of trainings that you guys plan to roll out? Or is that pretty, like, if there's a need, that you'll try to make that happen?
Well, in reality, right now there's 4 of us doing the trainings, or 5 of us doing the trainings. And we only have so many days and hours to do this. So we have not made the final list. I mean, what we put up there is what we had proposed we could do. If there are more, then we need to discuss that among the group to see if we can do it or not. But if you really think you need a regional training, and I'm emphasizing regional, it will not be state by state, then contact NASDA and express your interest.
Okay, great. And how long will it take one farm to complete the readiness review?
It depends on the size of the operation, but we're looking at, say, 2 hours. We hope that will be enough, but if it's a huge operation, it may take a lot longer.
Okay, but we should be budgeting at least 2 hours minimum at the low end.
That's correct.
Okay. And so another question is, if there are farmers who must comply by 2018 and the assessors are not trained until after June of 2018, in the Northeast, for example, where no date is given, is it conceivable that the FDA would be going onto a farm before a readiness review is completed?
Well, I can be facetious and say that's FDA's decision. Well, it is FDA's decision, but what we, and again, Vermont is going to do, proposed, is that they do on-farm readiness reviews first before there are any inspections. And FDA, I think, has bought into that. But again, we don't have anything in writing. And until you have something in writing, you don't have anything for sure.
Okay.
This is Christina.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Christina, do you guys want to talk a bit about the model you have in Vermont and what you're planning to do?
Yeah, and so just to clarify, that's kind of our hope is that we'll be able to provide on-farm readiness reviews to any farm that wants one before we undergo an inspection on that farm. That's going to be subject to cooperation with our growers and also, the resources that we have in terms of staff. But I would also, just to clarify the previous question, in most states at this point, it will be the state inspectors who are on a farm. So I think that certainly FDA could show up on a farm regardless of whether a farm has had an on-farm readiness review, but for routine inspections, I think a lot of states are looking at the very least, offering on-farm readiness reviews prior to inspections. In some cases, really pushing for that to be the model. The one thing that I can't speak to with a great deal of depth, but I will share, is that there is also a NASDA inspectional approach working group. I'm a part of kind of a different arm of the working group than those folks that are actually looking at, well, what's going to happen on an inspection. But there are a number of states and FDA and NASDA looking at a model for the initial inspection on any produce farm, really focusing on education. So it's going to be very different from an on-farm readiness review, but we're looking at a model where we would, in very limited cases, take enforcement actions on those initial inspections, and where those inspections would really be focused on education and kind of getting ready for a subsequent routine inspection where there could be some enforcement consequences.
Yeah, and I think something that Christine mentioned too is, there's states have a lot of leeway on how they handle the inspections or on-farm readiness reviews, or in reality, whether they do on-farm readiness reviews or not. We've developing materials to hopefully help growers prepare for an inspection, and that is really the role of this project.
Okay, any other questions folks would like to ask? We've got plenty of time, and I'd love to keep the conversation going because this is great. Or if there are any other thoughts or comments from folks who are part of the on-farm readiness review development or pilot process that want to jump in, please feel free.
This is Betsy again. I see there's a lot of questions about what to expect from compliance and can we get out there, will we be trained? I think there's a whole lot we just don't know about expectations. There's educate before you regulate, but there aren't regulators trained. The power is lying at the state level, so it could be that states choose different ways of doing this. And I think the important thing is to engage in this conversation and to be aware of it so that we're nimble enough to make modifications when we need and as we go. And I kind of feel like our feet are on a bit of sand on this one, and in the sense that it keeps shifting a bit. And I think in extension, we're used to being pretty nimble. It gets kind of wacky with funding that has deliverable dates. I think that's what I'm struggling with now, how to budget for this stuff if you're going to do it. Wes in New Jersey, I think, has a pretty good example of the Department of Ag working closely with extension. That's not true in every state. And so I think if you're on here, I think you have to figure out what your state's doing and how to be part of that conversation, and then stay on top of it so that you know how to modify to make it work. And I don't know if other people agree with that or if that's just muddying the water too much, but it's kind of loosey-goosey right now, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is Wes, and I agree with Betsy. I think there is, 50 states of which 43 have grants. How you get involved with those, again, is going to be state by state. Do you have someone you've worked with in the past that you could contact? Is there already a mechanism set up either through the university or through the either agriculture or health department? You just need to, I'll be frank, weasel your way in there if you're interested in doing this. Because if not, you're not going to be involved, and your growers are going to be, your growers are going to be worse for it. So I think if you're really interested, now is the time to get involved, because there is money available, and it will be available for a relatively short time.
So there was a question to, I think, just pull on some clarification a little bit there, which I think you just offered, Wes, but must states participate in this training to do the on-farm readiness review, or is there flexibility?
If you're going to do on-farm readiness review, you need to go through the training. Now, is there anything written in stone saying you can't use the materials? No, there is not. But we really encourage you to go through the training if at all possible.
So I think the question is also speaks to the states. I think the Departments of Ag and Health is what the question is targeting. Are they required to participate in this training, or to provide the training, I guess, to growers, or is there flexibility in what they provide?
They are not required to provide the training. There's no regulation saying they have to do this. What we're trying to do is develop materials that will help them work with growers.
Okay, are there other questions that folks are eager to ask? And did that, Diane, I just want to make sure that clarified what you were trying to ask.
It did.
Okay, great, thanks. And Angela, I guess I'll ask you, you had a lot of questions in the beginning. Did you have any other questions that you wanted to pull out? No? Okay, great. And I'll give another opportunity for last comments from people who have been involved in the process who want to chime in. How about Chris? Do you have any last words?
Hey, yeah, this is Chris. So my involvement with the OFRR was going through the Vermont pilot. And so first thing I'd like to say is thanks to Wes for covering it in today's webinar so well. Really, to me, did a super job sort of getting the points across and giving a good overview of the tool and the process. And we had a ton of people on, which to me suggests that it was something people were we're very interested in hearing more about. So thanks for that. The process, from my perspective, again, being very involved in it in a very limited way, has been a heavy lift, and I really appreciate everybody who's put so much time into developing the tool and the resources and the materials. To me, it's sort of a critical link between the national curriculum from the Produce Safety Alliance and the inspectional activities that'll happen downstream. And it also serves as a great way for extension educators and other educators to get more coordinated with state and state regulators in particular. So I see it as a really critical link between, you know, in the overall produce safety education and regulatory frameworks. So that's all I really have to offer. Just appreciate everybody's interest and participation.
Thanks, Chris. And I'll give it one last chance if folks want to put a question in the chat box before we end today. Okay, well, thank you so much, Wes, for taking the time to do this and provide us with this overview. It's much appreciated. And thanks everybody for joining and your interest. And oh, sorry, there's just one more question that came in. Just to confirm, is it intended for extension person to lead the OFRR?
Yes, I think it's a short answer, yes. We feel, again, this is the group, me talking for the group, put it that way. We feel the extension has the best ability to do this because they're usually working with growers. They know what to react with growers. I also, when we have done the on-farm part of this in the past, we started out where only one person would ask questions and the other person would stay in the background. We've changed that a little bit. If you have two people, you can ask questions, but one person must be the leader of that group. And that person, we feel, should be the extension person, leading it, and have in the final discussion, the extension person leads the final discussion.
Great, thanks, Wes. Okay, so it would be intended for the Department of Ag person to, I'm sorry, it would not be intended for the Department of Ag person to lead it, but it would be best for them to be there.
Oh, absolutely, they should be there. I think it's very important, realizing there's only so many people and so much time, but if at all possible, I think someone from the Department of Ag and Extension should be there together going through it. So they're seeing the same thing and they're asking the same type of questions so everyone understands what's going on. Just one other thing, Elizabeth, which I forgot to mention is, some of the initial contact can be done over the phone. For instance, if you may be able to do some of those checklists before you even get to the farm, which would, again, save some time. And since these are voluntary, the growers would be contacting, say, Extension or the Department of Ag saying, we would like to have one of these. The other thing is that growers do need to go through the grower training, the PSA training or equivalent, before the on-farm readiness review. That is very critical because the on-farm readiness review is really tied to the PSA modules. It's a part of that continuum that I talked about before.
Okay, we do have another question. So at an earlier meeting, it was explained that in the event of a finding of egregious conditions on the farm, the visit could become regulatory. Does that still apply if Extension is leading the meeting?
That is an interesting question. My feeling, this is personal, this is not coming from NASDA, is that if I'm an extension person and I'm working with a grower, and this is confidential visit, if there is an egregious position, I will work with that grower on that egregious position. I am not an inspector, I'm not a regulator, I am an educator. Thus, I will help them change what the issue may be.
Okay, and then there is a question about the voluntary nature of the OFRR. So there is some question about, there was a thought that farms would have to go through this review process, therefore making it not voluntary. Is that, can you provide some clarification on that?
It is voluntary. No one has to go through this. Well, again, what we're trying to do is develop materials to help the grower be able to pass an FDA or a state regulatory inspection. Does not mean they have to do it.
But it sounds like from what Vermont is trying to do is that they are hoping to get everybody to go through it, but not mandatory, rather on a voluntary basis.
Yeah, I think, there's some state to state differences, obviously, and each state is going to handle things a little bit different ways. But as far as we're concerned, it's not a mandatory thing to do, but a state probably could make it mandatory if they wanted to.
Okay, any other questions? That was a good trickle of questions that came in there, prompting a little more discussion. So I'll give it a second. And again, if I don't see anything, I'll thank Wes again for his time and effort on this, and everybody else for joining, and appreciate your time today. And with no further questions coming in, I'll go ahead and say have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining today, folks. Thanks, Wes.
Yep.
Thank you all.